Fritz Lang's silent epic Metropolis has long been one of the most influential sci-fi films of all time. Written by Thea Von Harbou, it's the story of a futuristic city and the classes at war within it.
Also written by Thea Von Harbou, the book version was developed alongside the screenplay, and first published serialized in a magazine.
So, how does an adaptation written by the same author change from page to screen? It's a 100-year-old movie, so I'm not even going to warn you about spoilers, because it's long past time to ask, what's the difference? A little bit of context to start with, we're using 2010's The Complete Metropolis, a version of the film reassembled after discovering a damaged print in Buenos Aires and more missing scenes archived in New Zealand. There are some damaged stretches that only survived on 16mm and even a few spots still missing where title cards fill in the plot holes. Still, it's supposedly as close to the original release of the film that we've got.
First published in 1925, Thea Von Harbou's Metropolis was written with the full intention of becoming a film for her collaborator and husband at the time, Fritz Lang. Their working relationship created Dr. Mabuse and M, among others, and lasted until they got divorced in 1933, when Lang left for Hollywood, and Von Harbou stayed behind and joined the Nazi Party.
While she made a number of films for the Third Reich, and the book features a few undeniably racist spots that are, at minimum, on par with a lot of the writing in the 1920s, neither the book nor the film versions of Metropolis get anywhere close to endorsing fascism or dictators. In fact, it's tough to parse out just what exactly they are endorsing. Years later, Lang himself would say he didn't like the film because the central ideas just didn't make sense.
And so, more than anything, because Von Harbou wrote both the book and the movie, Metropolis becomes an early and interesting comparison between the mediums, as she and Lang set about deciding how best to tell the same story in two different art forms.
To start with the obvious, plot-wise, the book and movie are not that different. The core of the story is very much the same. Metropolis is split into two distinct classes, a ruling class and a working class, or as they put it in both mediums, the brain and the hands. Frater, son of Joe Fraterson, the master of Metropolis, meets and immediately falls in love with Maria, champion of the workers, and begins to suspect he might be a long-prophesied mediator, the heart that can speak to both the head and the hands. This basic structure is present in both the book and the movie. However, a few key differences shift the focus in the adaptation.
While the movie opens with images of the machines at work and the workers filing in, the book opens with Frater playing an organ and having some type of hallucination, seeing the planets painted on the domed ceiling of the cathedral come to life and beckon him. He's drunk on the old creative juices and in a spiritual reverie, but this is just the beginning of a theme that runs throughout the book, but not the movie. When Frater first ventures beneath the city, he's so horrified by the sight of machines becoming ancient, mythical gods. Old Testament figures like Moloch and Baal, alongside Hindu deities Durga and Ganesh. Von Harbou continues using this spiritual imagery throughout the novel, like a ton.
In the film, it's only the first machine that turns into the child-eating Moloch, and it seems as though it's because Frater is thrown backwards by an explosion and is hallucinating thanks to a concussion. The only other hint of mysticism to have survived the adaptation comes from another moment where Frater's brain is a little bit scrambled. He envisions a priest sermonizing about a woman named Babylon who will bring death to Metropolis.
Meanwhile, the book and movie also follow Joe Fraterson and inventor Rotwang as they conspire to create a machine man, one who can withstand the hunger of the machines which drive Metropolis. Book Joe is ruthlessly efficient. He's cold to the pleas of his son. Have pity on the workers, please, Papa, please. Before we meet Rotwang in the book, however, Von Harbou details the long and mysterious history of Rotwang's house.
The movie version of the house is creepy German expressionist design at its finest, to be sure, but the novel goes farther back to say that the house is older than Metropolis itself and was built by a magician and sealed with the mark of Satan so that death comes to anybody who tries to tear it down. Another bit of witchcraft and mysticism that didn't make the jump from page to screen. What it does, though, is reframe the conflict as not just class against class, but about faith versus science, with darker forces like witchcraft being the root of societal evil.
The movie leans almost exclusively on automation and advancing technology as a sort of slippery slope to class divide, keeping the workers mindlessly toiling on monotonous machines. It should also be noted here that the society portrayed in Metropolis is at best a very incomplete picture. H.G. Wells himself was famously critical of Metropolis for being, well, kinda dumb. Asking questions like, what are all these people making with these machines, and who's buying it, whatever it is, and this doesn't make sense! Which is not a question, and also I'm paraphrasing, but look, he was big in sci-fi and he didn't like it.
Right. The point is, the inclusion of more spiritual conflict in the book fleshes out the story in a more coherent way. Not that the book gives us more info in terms of how Metropolis functions economically, because it very much does not. There's a farmer that shows up at one point, but just for a second. All the gods and mysticism in the book do succeed in making the story about something a little more universal, by taking the focus off the minutiae of how the society actually works. Elsewhere in the confusing society of Metropolis, we find Yoshiwara, a nightclubbish place where Metropolis's upper crust hang out. We first see Yoshiwara after Freighter swaps places with a worker named Georgie and sends him above ground to live in the daylight. Georgie is swarmed by flyers for the nightclub and finds himself dropping a bunch of Freighter's pocket money on a night out.
In the book, Georgie finds himself at Yoshiwara in the same way, however it's more of a high-class opium den and brothel. The customers at Yoshiwara are on Maui, a sort of communal trance drug in which the person in the middle of a giant seashell on a floating white disc experiences the ecstasy of everyone around him, and poor Georgie just never had a chance. A worker who's only known hardship, Georgie's version of ecstasy really freaks out the rich folks at Yoshiwara. He rants and raves about being the devil himself, sending many of the women of Yoshiwara into terrified frenzies in a scene that's a nod to how Von Harbou's religious overtones add to the class divide of the narrative.
We learn about Georgie's bad trip from a man named September, who's also not in the movie. September is the proprietor of Yoshiwara and is described as having an unknown origin. According to the book, all of his features seem to be from different parts of the world, and the descriptions of them lean into the racist stereotypes we mentioned earlier. But while September seems to hint at a side of Metropolis that's less homogenous, he's literally the only character or plot point that attempts to do this. Either way, it's not surprising that he was lifted out of the film version.
Getting back to Joe and Rotwang, at this point in both the book and movie, Joe goes to see the mysterious old inventor. We find out that Joe's late wife Hel was actually in love with Rotwang, and Rotwang never recovered from Joe swooping in and stealing Hel. It's made much clearer in the book that Joe literally took Hel from Rotwang, like against her will.
Joe has come to ask Rotwang about a map that's been found among the workers. Movie Rotwang has to look it up and think about it, but book Rotwang knows exactly what it is immediately and relishes in the idea that he's got something over the master of Metropolis. They follow the map beneath the city and eavesdrop on a gathering held by Maria, where she preaches a peaceful mediation between the head and the hands. In the movie, Rotwang sees Joe's son Freighter falling for Maria, but keeps Joe from seeing it. It's here that he decides to use Maria's image for his machine man, as a way to drive a wedge between Joe and his son, taking the last bit of Hel away from his old rival.
Book Joe, however, sees his son with Maria. It's Joe who chooses Maria's image. As Freighter's father and as the master of Metropolis, Joe is hoping to break Freighter's heart and return him to the upper class, while also ruining Maria's reputation among the workers. It's a difference that gives Book Joe more responsibility for everything that happens next, as opposed to just sort of getting played by Rotwang.
While Rotwang's motives are just a little bit different, Joe's are further fleshed out in the book by visits to his mother. She's confined to a wheelchair because she was so upset with the unfeeling way Joe runs Metropolis, she threw herself down in a fit of rage and was never able to walk again, able to only use her head and her hands. These scenes reveal him to be more tortured than he lets on. He comes to his mother for advice, but she only twists the knife about what an awful guy he is and how he deserves whatever's coming his way.
Once Rotwang produces the robotic version of Maria and unleashes it onto Metropolis, we start to see another sort of difference in the adaptation through the edit. Where the book will have Freighter describing a dream about Maria unleashing death on Metropolis, in the film we see it in real time. Same goes for the unveiling of Maria. In the book, an old friend witnesses the robotic Maria's effect on the men of Metropolis, but the movie plays that scene out in a truly bizarre dance sequence for the city's elitist of elites, turning them into raving, lusting weirdos.
The movie also adds a few things that weren't in the book in the name of being more cinematic. After all, in 1927, silent film had reached its peak, from Chaplin and Keaton to Russian editing and the German expressionism Lang himself was contributing to. The idea that a movie needed to be more cinematic was as important as it was brand new. And so in the film, we get to see the actual transformation of Rotwang's creation into Maria's likeness, while the book doesn't describe it at all. And then, after the uprising has taken hold and the underground city is flooding, Book Maria is trapped underground with the children on her own, while the movie puts Freighter into the action as well. Two additions that allow Lang to flex some visual and editorial muscles to create awe and suspense on screen.
As the story heads to its end, the narrative lines up pretty well again. The mob of workers who believe their children to have drowned underground captures the robot Maria and burns her at the stake as punishment for seducing them into the uprising, while the real Maria escapes to the cathedral only to be chased by a love-mad Rotwang who believes himself dead and Maria his long-lost love, Hell. Freighter dukes it out with Rotwang on the top of the cathedral, ultimately winning the fight when Rotwang falls to his death.
And Joe, who stress-watched the whole thing to the point where his hair turned white, ultimately shakes hands with Grodd, the foreman of the Heart Machine and representative of the workers, thanks to Freighter stepping in to be the fabled mediator of Metropolis. And that's it. Metropolis lay in ruins, but I guess they're friends now.
The end of the book, however, leans back into Joe's different motivations. He tells Freighter that he tried to tear down Metropolis so that Freighter might be able to rebuild it. And in the last chapter, Joe pays a final visit to his mother where she gives him a letter from Hell that he was not to read until, as Hell said, he'd found his way back home. In the letter, she tells Joe that she's waiting for him with God and will see him again one day, giving a guy who's been a real bastard this whole time a little bit of forgiveness.
It also gives the novel one last note of religion to end on, making Von Harbou's book a metaphor-laden story of the intersection of science, religion, and humanity, while Von Harbou's script pulls most of that out. Without those themes to explore, Fritz Lang's film has only the big, cinematic science fiction aspects left to worry about.
But we, along with H.G. Wells, still don't know what they're making. Maybe it's just all the electricity? I don't know. It's just kind of hard to say, because we never see anyone eat in the movie.
That'll do it for this episode. Let us know what other adaptations you'd like to see us take on in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to IGN Movies and TV for more What's the Difference?